And that giant cacophony tells you you're back once more with the Power of Three podcast. And today we're travelling into the world of Doctor Who factual writing, as we are going to be looking at the latest release from the Black Archive series, which are published by Obverse Books through in Edinburgh. I'm Kenny Smith, and today we're going to be discussing Castrovalva. We all know it's Peter Davison's first adventure as the Doctor, well, at least the first to be broadcast, but I think it was the third to be recorded. And we're going to have a wee preview of it now. I'm afraid one of us is deluded about our geography. The second of Christopher H. Bidmead's scripts, sweeping away the last of the 1970s and setting up the era of the Fifth Doctor, Castrovalva, 1982, encodes contemporary ideas in an antique setting. This Black Archive considers fictional and studio spaces, created worlds and people, the architecture of labyrinths and the influence of figures such as Jorge Luis Borges, Douglas Hofstadter and M.C. Escher before asking, what does the Master want? And if you're really keen to have a quick look at what it's all about, if you visit the page www.obversebooks.co.uk/product/77-Castrovalva, you can actually read a sample chapter. But before you do that, why don't we speak to the author about it? We're now going to welcome him to the Power of Three.
Hello, my name is Andrew Orton, and I have written a Black Archive book for Obverse, which is on the Doctor Who story Castrovalva.
Before we start, Andrew, you should just confirm that your surname is Orton, you're not made out of plastic, and you don't have a gun in your hand.
Now, that's a joke I've obviously never heard before. Yes, I'm not made out of plastic, and there's no terror involved in these ones.
That is very good to hear. So, yes, I presumed you had heard it before, but hey, somebody might not have heard it, so...
Well, my brother is a Doctor Who fan as well. Some people might know him, Chris Orton, so we are the Ortons, so we do get that, yeah.
Yeah, you're not twins, are you?
We're not, thankfully.
Okay, because then you could be Gary Russell's Auton twins, and one of you could be Kira, one could be Killian. Anyway,
yeah, that's a nice obscure reference.
Very, very obscure reference. So, yeah. Yes, so as you say, you have just had Castrovalva published.
Yes.
And of course, this is your second Black Archive.
It is. My first was on The Deadly Assassin, came out a year or two back. And I immediately pitched another one, which I intended to be extremely different, going in a different area, and then realised I'd pitched another one for a story in which the Master traps the Doctor in a strange non-Euclidean universe, which is common to both stories, so that was a bit of a mistake. But yeah, no, I've loved writing both of them. It's a great little line. The work that people do of teasing out sort of monographs, full-length 40,000 word monographs on each Doctor Who story, I think is amazing, and there is that much to write. There's plenty to write about, so yeah, it's been good to do them both.
I take it you'd been a fan of the range before you got your pitch in to do Deadly Assassin.
Yeah, I mean, I've not read all of them, but they're good. The ones I have read have been very good. I think the one on the Talons of Wen Chiang is seminal. Dale Smith, who did that one, really deconstructs the racial elements of it. It's a brilliant piece of work. And there are others in the series that I've read and enjoyed. The Massacre is pretty good. I think that was Jim Kura Smith. But yeah, it's a great range. Fantastic.
Brilliant. So, Castrovalva. When do you recall seeing it for the first time? Did you see it on broadcast at first?
I didn't. I wasn't born on broadcast.
You young man. That sounds really camp.
Yeah, I was actually born 3 days after Time Flight Part 4 was broadcast, but I don't usually tell people that. And I actually phrase it as I was born as Snake Dance was going into the studio, because that's a better getting to fame. But yeah, so Castrovalva, I read the book first, actually. It was the novelisation when I was at school. And then when the VHS came out in 92-ish, something like that, I think it was 92, I got the VHS and watched it, and it was the cover really that fascinated me, because it was a lovely painting of the Doctor going upstairs and downstairs like an Escher print. Absolutely looked fantastic, and a strange sort of pastel-y, pinky vibe to it. And it was a regeneration story, which was always fascinating when you were a kid. So so it was one I think I bought with my birthday money. Watched it, thought it was great. Loved Peter Davison, and I'd seen a few stories by then. I became a fan in 1990, really, which is in many ways the wrong year to become a Doctor Who fan. I'd seen a couple of episodes on broadcast before that. But yeah, it's a great story, and it does things that nobody else has done in Doctor Who, I think, with the TARDIS and investigating how it works and what can be done. It's the TARDIS is a sort of as a space machine as much as a time machine. It does unusual things with space folding around on itself. And then it goes to the town of Castrovalva, and that's obviously does the same thing. It all overlaps and unfolds, and some of the ideas presented, I think, are really unusual and quite bold to do in the television studio.
I suppose that's three damn good reasons to approach it and pick this one as the one to pitch. So we were aware that Logopolis had been commissioned around the same time as well.
I was, yes, and we had some very early discussions about tying them together a little bit. We didn't go hugely in that direction in the end, but yes, I was aware that they were both being done and that they were probably going to be published at the same time. I was actually commissioned for Castrovalva, I think, in 2021. It was about that. It's quite a long time ago, so I've been sort of chipping away at it for quite a while. It's not been at the top of the pile of things to do until it was, until the deadline, as these things always are. But yeah, so it's some of it was written over sort of a 4-year period in pieces. But yeah, it's a good story, Castrovalva, and coming so soon after Logopolis, I think the two really work well together. I sometimes sort of want to sit down and watch them like one big film, like Kill Bill or something like that, where it's a two-parter, And if you see the whole thing in context, it's a different story somehow. Yeah, it's good. I really enjoyed it.
Kill Tom. You could go with that as an alternative title.
That's it.
Volumes 1 and 2.
There's a fan edit there somewhere. I should do that.
I'm sure you've got the skills to do that one. So, yeah. So, having had a wee look through the book, you've broken it down into 5 chapters. And I just wonder if you could maybe sort of give us a wee overview of each of them, if we could just talk our way through them. So the first one is A New Beginning.
Yes, well, Castrovalva is a sort of bit of a new start for Doctor Who. It is a regeneration story. New Doctor comes in, Peter Davison, takes it in a completely different direction to the previous Doctor. Tom Baker, I think, was by this stage known for maybe not being the most generous of actors in the way he dealt with other actors. It was always about him, really. So I think when Peter Davison came in and had the complete opposite approach, where he was playing it like he didn't have to be the most important person in the scene, it did give the series a new, it's kind of a new feel, really. It's more of an ensemble piece, and Davison does that really well, and he's quieter and he's more subtle and he thinks about things. So the first chapter is really about that new start for the series. One thing I find really interesting is, and I think possibly this is partly because Davison maybe didn't quite know what he wanted to do with the part when he started. So he has bits in it where he's doing impressions of the other Doctors in the TARDIS. And a lot of that isn't in the script. It's just sort of, it must have come out of the rehearsal process. And I think there's a comment from Fiona Cumming to suggest that he was particularly very keen on putting bits of William Hartnell in and bits of Patrick Troughton in. So he does sort of little impressions of them as you go on. So suddenly it becomes a thing about it's the whole history of Doctor Who's kind of condensed. It's something you can play with, and the Master comes back, obviously. So it's in a strange period of the programme's history where it was just starting to play with the bits of its past that people remembered, if you like. Because for most of the first sort of 15 years of Doctor Who, it was just new stories every week, and maybe the Daleks came back or maybe the Master came back, but other than that, it was just it was a new story. And then around the time of 1980, 1981, it does start to get a bit interested in its own history, I think, and it uses that to tell stories. There is a danger that puts off the more casual viewer, and I think that can be overstated as well. People, I think, do pick up references even if they're new to them, they can tell it is a reference. But yeah, it's about that aspect of the programme, really, the first chapter.
I think it's a really good breakdown, because I enjoyed looking at, because it definitely is the point of JNT's definitely got his feet under the table. He's obviously got his continuity advisor on hand, and for better or for worse. And these things are starting to leak in it, and it's definitely a noticeable change and becoming, I don't think it's not even introspective. It's almost, it's you can see where things are going to go. Little would we realise just how far things would go. But it definitely is it shows that the wheels are in motion and appealing to the fans, especially.
I think there's two sides to it, and one is, I think it's fine to do that and use those elements. If you've created this fictional world, why not use it? To me, the problem comes when you use them in ways that are it's the facade level. There's no emotional depth to it. So while you have references to Ogrons and Daleks and things like that in Castrovalva, elsewhere in season 19, there's other stuff. There's Time Flight where the characters meet the Master again, and they don't mention the fact that you're the man who killed my auntie, or you're the man who killed my previous incarnation, or my planet is gone. You know, you can't even see Metulla Oriensis. All those kind of, it's never mentioned and I think that's probably you kind of it's interested in the semiotic level, the symbols of the program, but not necessarily the emotional depth of the program. And it feels a mistake, that I think it's very surface level, and so you feel like if you're not a fan, you're probably missing out on a reference that you would otherwise have been able to assume what was going on.
Yeah, chapter 2.
Yeah,
excellent. Again, excellent with architectural configuration in television spaces, and that quote that you have right at the start really sets the way that it goes. When Peter Davison said, "Television over here, it always seemed to me, came out of theatre, whereas in America, television came out of film." And I think that is so true. It's just one of those statements that, when you think about it, completely makes sense. Peter's absolutely right.
Absolutely, and I have a bit of a bugbear, which I try not to get on my high horse about, or my soapbox more like, which is with modern television. I have a problem with the way modern television's made. It's probably because of my formative grounding in television. But television these days always wants to be this thing that they call it cinematic. It looks cinematic. And it seems to me that cinema should be cinematic and television is a different thing. And you can make television cinematic, and by that they mean realist and exciting, and it's usually single camera and it's usually on film or digital film. But there used to be other ways of making television which weren't that, and videotape was one of those, multi-camera, where you've got everybody in a room and you play a scene once and have several cameras on them, rather than have several goes at playing the scene with one camera on them. And it has this aspect where it doesn't have to be realist. So television as it used to be, film VT mix, like Castrovalva was, there's nobody making that programme who thinks that looks like a real Mediterranean city that they're in. Everyone knows it's in a studio, and it doesn't matter. It's like when you go to the theatre and you see Hamlet's castle. You know it doesn't look like a real castle. It's got a flat floor and it's a wooden set, and it's absolutely fine. And television used to be able to do that, and I don't think it can do it anymore, and I think that's a shame. So this chapter of the book is really about how the videotape studio has its own features and elements which are part of the method of production, and which can tell stories in ways that television doesn't tell anymore.
I liked your observation that the diagram on the back of the mirror is in fact the studio layout, which I had never noticed. Yeah. And it's like, of course it is.
I've got a copy of the studio layout, and some people who know me might know I have a pastime, which is to recreate studio sets in CGI. And I have done the Castrovalva one, and I found the plans for it and built it. And it was only when I built that, this looks familiar. And I looked down and this looks like it's something I've seen before. And I realised it's the back of the mirror drawn. So somebody, a member of the production crew, had obviously had the set plan in front of them and copied it onto the mirror. And then Michael Sheard pretended he drew it. It isn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating chapter, because particularly the way that TV's made now is so completely different to the way it was then, with the rehearsals, go on film, come back, more rehearsals, studio, and then whack it all together in the edit. Whereas rehearsal, what's that? 21st century.
Yeah, and I think rehearsal was a really good thing, because it let the actors get into the characters and work out what they were going to do. More specifically, the recording process, it was done in one go like a play, and people did genuinely interact. And then when I watch things that are made on film, and there are many things on film that I love. I wrote a book about Robin of Sherwood, which is on film. But when the people do make things single camera, I always feel a bit of a disconnect because it never feels like the characters are talking to each other when you cut from close up to close up because they were recorded at separate times. That might just be me. And whether I would know if I didn't know intellectually, whether I would spot it, I don't know. But there's something about multi-camera studio which I just find absolutely in the moment, and I'm there, and I think it's wonderful. It's a great way of making television, and I think it's a shame that it's not really done these days except on things like EastEnders.
True.
You know, and EastEnders is a fine programme for what it does. I mean, I'm not a huge fan, I don't watch it every week, but it's the last remnant of a way of making television. Emmerdale, Coronation Street, and they're about it. And it's such a shame that television's just got sidelined into this realism, this idea of realism, and everything has to look perfect. And I think I do have a theory that in a few years' time, some executive at Netflix or somewhere like that is going to say, we're spending a fortune making these programs because we're shooting everything 5 times for every scene. Why don't we just shoot it once and put 5 cameras on it and save a fortune? And they'll think it's the best idea since sliced bread. And I'm absolutely convinced that's going to happen at some point. Can't wait.
Wow, I think the TV expenditure bubble is being looked at as we speak, so
Exactly.
who knows? Yeah. Moving on, Chapter 3. This is a really, really good read. Ontology and world building. And it really does get you thinking. It really does take you out of the world of TV and it takes you into philosophy.
Thank you. Yes, it was an investigation really around the character of Shardavan. Shardavan is a strange character. So in Castrovalva, the world is fictional. The Masters created this world as a fictional world. And Shardavan's the character who realizes that it is fictional. And he realizes it as the world starts to break down. So there's something about the complexity of that breakdown which seems to encourage him to come to that realization. And the philosophical aspect is a very ancient idea. So without going into too much minute detail on it, but the ancient Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, and they had slightly opposing views. And Plato said, he had a rationalist view, which was that he had this idea that if you draw a circle on a bit of paper, it's not a perfect circle, it's a bit wobbly at one side and it's not exactly round, but it's a kind of reflection of the concept of a perfect circle, which is round and 360 degrees and everything else. So what he saw was kind of the world that we see is a shadow of some higher perfect world. And he called those perfect ideas universals. And then Aristotle, who was his student, came along and had a different view and said, well, no, you got it the wrong way around. The world that we see is the empirical world. He was an empiricist. And any idea that we have about the perfect circle is a reflection of the things that we see in the real world. Or a perfect dog, you think of a dog and there's an idea of a dog, but it's based on the fact that there are loads of different species, and not species, but loads of different types of dog. So he had a very different view that what we saw was what drove what we thought. And Shardavan has this odd position where he's the reflection of both of those in different ways. So he sees, with his empiricism, he sees that Castrovalva isn't real because of the History of Castrovalva book, which he notices tells the story up to the present day, even though it should only have the history of the town up to a point. So it's got a kind of error in the matrix, if you like. But then he uses that to divine that means the world I'm living in is fictional, and I'm just seeing a reflection of some larger world, which is a very Plato-esque idea. So it's a strange mix of them both, but it's absolutely in there. Nobody ever quite makes the step of saying we're also characters in the TV series, which I think is probably a wise decision because that gets a bit sort of clever and smarmy. But yeah, you can do that, but generally it's a bit sort of meta, isn't it, and tedious. But yeah, so there's a great philosophical aspect underlying all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way that you describe it as being sort of the realization of being a fiction effectively within a fiction. But if we treat it as a reality, a fiction within reality, and having that, and just the complexity of everything there, and the fact that, as you talk about the idea of the world being, it could have been created 5 minutes ago, but this superior being could have given us the idea that we have got memories, that the whole planet's billions of years old and our whole lives only started a few minutes ago but been implanted into us, and looking at that, bringing it in. And then it's right at the end when you describe it as being the dwellings of simplicity. It is, and it just absolutely is like, yeah, it's, I wonder if Chris Bidmead's having a laugh at our expense there.
I think it probably is. I mean, there is just a coincidence. I think it is probably a coincidence in the script that as Castrovalva falls apart, Shadavan's realization becomes apparent, so the two kind of go together. So as the world becomes less simple and more complex, his mind becomes more complex and he realizes his fictionality. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the fact that Bidmead wrote it that way, I think he knew what he was doing. In some ways he must have known what he was doing, because it's a strange thing to start playing with fiction in that way if you don't know what you're doing.
Page 87. That's very, very funny.
Is it?
That's this page is intentionally left blank.
Yes. Yeah. But that's brilliant. I remember doing exams which said that. So it used to wind me up back then because it's not blank.
Yes, I was the same. I'm glad it's not just me. So then we come to chapter 4, recursion and strange loops. And I think recursion is one of those words and those terms that, if you know your Castrovalva and love it, it's one that you'll bring in quite often into your everyday conversations, because I know that I certainly have.
I think Bidmead did use some ideas and concepts that maybe the normal BBC One audience didn't come across very often. I think this is probably one of them. There are others. But it's this idea that that there was a problem in maths in the early 20th century where they realised there were things you could do in maths which didn't make sense. So one of them is the idea that you can have a set of things called set theory. You have a set of things like a set of apples or a set of oranges, and then you could have a set of sets. So sets can go in sets, and that set would contain itself because it's a set, so it would be in the set of sets. But then you can have a set which contains everything that isn't in that set. So you put something in the set, then it is in the set, so it should be out of the set, but now it's out of the set, it should be back in the set because it's not it. So you get into this recursive loop, and all these mathematicians, particularly a guy called David Hilbert, realised that maths was based upon these premises that weren't supportable because you could get into these loop situations. And 10 years later, a guy called Gödel came up with an incompleteness theorem, which basically said that will always be the case. There's always going to be those circumstances unless you go outside of the system, look at maths from the outside and say, this is what's happening. So once you get into these looped situations, it becomes impossible to have a definitive version of maths. So then 1980s, late 70s, early 80s, a guy called Hofstadter wrote a book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, which was about a lot of these issues. Escher was an artist who'd made a lot of images and artworks which employed these sorts of ideas of things going on round in recursive loops. And Hofstadter wrote a book where he called these things strange loops. And so when Bidmead was writing Castrovalva, it's fairly clear that that's an influence on the programme, because the Doctor gets trapped in a strange loop at the end. He runs down some steps in Castrovalva, goes through a door, and he's back at the top of the steps again. And that's exactly what Bidmead was playing with. So using maths as a kind of a physical space in reality and then tying it all back on itself was definitely what Bidmead was up to.
I think it's great to be able to bring in that whole notion of, for a story that's based on mathematics, ultimately it's impossible art.
Yeah,
that is what it sort of boils down to.
It is, because I mean, there's some great stories that Escher was not a mathematician. He didn't know anything about maths academically, but at the same time he was producing all these amazing pieces of artwork where odd things were happening and things were recursioning. Is that a phrase? Recursive. And all this was happening. And then there was a British mathematician called Roger Penrose and his father Lionel Penrose, who were working in the same area but from the maths point of view and looking at the numbers behind it all. And then Penrose saw one of Escher's prints in a maths event in Amsterdam, I think, got in touch with Escher and said, we love what you do and we're writing about this sort of thing. And Escher, who knew nothing about maths, got sort of replied and thought, oh, there's all this other work going on, and they started to trade ideas. So Penrose then designed a little recursive image of his own, the Penrose triangle, and then Escher put that in his next piece of artwork. So it was sort of it was art and science meeting in the middle and finding a common ground. They've been doing the same thing, but from completely different aspects. And Escher is now considered a fairly important person in recursion mathematics, even though he knew nothing about mathematics.
I had no idea. There you go. This is the great thing about podcasts and Doctor Who books. You learn something new every day. Sydney Newman would be so proud.
Yeah. Educational, yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And just when you've been mentioning maths there, Chapter 5, Maths as Myths. Try saying that one with your teeth out.
I mean, it's called that because the title came first almost on that one. Yeah. It was, I mean, Bidmead he is very mathematical, and I think part of the worry about that, if you come into it from the outside, is it can be quite cold and not an interesting story. Bidmead gets around it by turning it into a kind of fairy tale environment. So Castrovalva, the town, it's a very place where they have lyrical dialogue. They talk about mild medicaments and our habiliments aren't up to the time, all these lovely turns of phrase. And it's all done in pastel colours and looks like a magical castle on a hilltop. So he's using all of these ideas of mathematics as a sort of fantasy realm. So although he's writing, and Bidmead has given a number of interviews where he said this, he was wanting to write very scientific things and not use techno-babble like reverse the polarity of the neutron flow. He kind of was doing that, I know, he was doing that sort of thing with his own terms, but they were block transfer computations, so they sounded a bit more legitimate. But it's still just magic. It really is. I mean, he was putting real scientific thought behind it, but Castrovalva is a fantasy land. Pure, it's got a tapestry which sees into the future or sees other things going on. Absolutely magic. He just clothed it in scientific terms. And he did it with other scripts in the same era. So State of Decay, which Terence Dix had written as a traditional vampire story originally, and Bidmead rewrote it as a kind of scientific vampire thing where they were in a tower, which it was a spaceship, and all there's all this clash again of these ideas, and it's right through that Tom's final season. But yeah, he was doing a fantasy story in the garb of science ideas, but then clothed in a fantasy story as well. It's a strange mix of things he did, and there's not a lot else like it that I can think of that does that in culture.
I also was greatly amused that when you were looking at there's a great discussion on the origins of the whole idea of block transfer computation and the fact it came from the Zilog Z80 instruction manual. Yes. What a great quote to find. I had completely forgotten that, the Zilog, which sounds like it should be in Battlestar Galactica.
It does, I know. I'm surprised you didn't use the name for a villain or a robot or something, the planet Zilog. But yes, he was an early adopter of computer technology, and I think, actually, I'm right in saying, I should check this, but block transfer itself was an existing term for how a computer rewrites its memory from one space to another or something like that. I'm not an expert on it, but he was reading through the instruction manual and he saw his computer as a box, a bit like the TARDIS, because it was bigger on the inside, there's concepts inside it, and he was using the language of it to tell a story. So I think he was running a program on that computer, and then there's something he opened where he could see the program running and rewriting and all this kind of stuff, and he was sort of taking those ideas back and basically putting the Master and Adric in the position of someone who was writing a computer program, which became Castrovalva.
I'm greatly amused by your final chapter. What does the Master want? Because, my God, what does he want? And I think you do a great job of trying to pull it all together.
Well, I was about to say that it's called What Does the Master Want? And my answer to that is I don't know. But he wants a lot of things, I think. That's the trouble. He's not a proper character, the Master. He's just an enemy. He's the opposite of the Doctor in a way. Just wants to do bad things, which sort of lets writers do whatever they want with him. It's a bit awkward when it is the same writer twice and they don't make sense, but it does happen in this case with the Logopolis and Castrovalva. But essentially, he has so many plans in those three stories, Track and Logopolis and Castrovalva, where he wants to get the Draken source. He wants to sustain his life. He wants the Doctor's body for regeneration. He wants to then go to Legopolis. He lands the TARDIS on the Barnet bypass and he's doing something there. And then he gives Nyssa a bracelet, which makes her do other things. And then he kills the Doctor and then he puts the universe to ransom. And then he's got another plan with Adric to send them to Event 1 and then make Castrovalva. It's just an absolute mess and there's no way you could have that many plans one after the other. And I think we all know that that's because the story, the series is made in turn and it's just, he's the villain and that's what he does. But I did try and just take a moment to unravel all of that and work out if he did have a psychology which made any of it make sense. I'm not convinced that it does, but yeah, he's a strange character. He has some strange plans, and I was trying to elucidate why that might be.
I put it to you, Andrew Orton, that your Black Archive looking at Castrovalva is perhaps possibly the first book that has ever been written that has a bibliography containing Children in Need, Danger Mouse, EastEnders, and I, Claudius.
I mean, I think you've just covered my personality there. I mean, that covers everything I'm interested in there. It might well be. I, Claudius is probably the greatest television programme ever made, maybe, perhaps, I don't know. Danger Mouse, I mean, who doesn't like Danger Mouse? Yeah, it's an odd mix. I think it does say something about me, actually, those things, because you do pick references based on things that you know. But yeah, it's... I like to have an eclectic collection of references.
Well, it's fantastic, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I highly recommend it. Again, as always, people know where to go. We'll have all the links and so on in the show notes, and I will tell people where to order it in a wee minute or two. But Andrew, where can people find out more about who you be and what you do on the social media world?
Yeah, well, probably the best place these days with the way that some of the social media sites are going is to find me on Blue Sky, where I am Andrew Orton on there, and I'm sure you'll find me immediately, probably holding up a copy of this book in a photograph. But yes, I am on there. Do get in touch if you want to have a word. Do buy the book and let me know what you think, if you enjoyed it. And do ask me questions about it on there. I will usually answer at some reasonable point without too much delay, hopefully.
Fantastic. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to discuss it, because it's been a real pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed hearing your thoughts, and completely unrehearsed as well, so well done.
Thanks, Kenny. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Lovely stuff. Thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time to chat after a very long day at work. If you're interested in ordering a copy of this book, we gave the address earlier, but we'll give it again: www.obverse.co.uk/product/77-Castrovalva. And you'll be able to pick up a copy for between $3.99 and $8.99, and it's currently available in paperback for £5.99. I'm sure that other currencies are available, but you can buy it through PayPal. And get your copy now. Hopefully hearing what we've said about it there will have whetted the appetite. And if you're wondering, there's a few more books still to come from Obverse this year. Coming soon in August, there's The Devil's Cord. That's the first 15th Doctor book they've looked at in this range. Then in October, it's The Enemy of the World. Gosh, strange to think that it's more than a decade since that was fully recovered. And then in December, it's The Mysterious Planet, the first part of The Trial of a Time Lord. So yes, that should be an interesting read. I'm looking forward to those in particular. And of course, the authors will be coming on here on The Power of Three to talk about them. We're not at all biased in supporting another Scottish publisher. Is The Power of Three a publisher? We publish podcasts every week. I never think of it in that sense anymore, now that I'm out of the media and into communications. Remember, you can find us on social media. We're at Power of Three Pod on Twitter. That's Power of Three with a number 3. We have our Facebook group, and you can follow me personally on Blue Sky, where I'm at Finished Zine. And now, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for, because, as you know, on the Power of Three, we like to go out with a song. And I was thinking of an obvious one for this one to start off, given that Castrovalva has been designed, and my first thought was An Architect's Dream by Kate Bush, but then I thought, no, let's think of something a bit more laterally. Then, during the discussion with Mr. Orton, he mentioned the work of MC Escher, And that triggered a memory in my mind. And it brought back an advert that was screened in Scotland in the 1980s, which was for McEwan's Lager. And this featured workers pushing giant balls up a building, and they then fell back down again as they made that picture by Escher come to life for an advert, and then they smashed through the window at the end when they saw people were watching and drinking lager. So I thought that would be a good one to do, and that came with a very memorable track, that advert. As I say, probably only shown in Scotland. And that was by the Scottish band Win, and this track was called You've Got the Power. So I thought that would be quite a good one to go with, and I have shared the advert on our socials this week, so go and have a look at it and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. It is MC Escher brought to life with a little bit of 1984 in there, and it's very dark and grungy and doom-laden. So yeah, go watch it and enjoy. And remember, if you are drinking alcohol, please do drink responsibly. Until next time, bye-bye.
Crazy chain that cuts the drug, that eats the fool who's golden hungry. Soft and scared and troubled